If you are wondering, do you need a tour guide to travel to Egypt, then you're in the right place. I'm Gus with Egypt Adventures Travel. I create customized itineraries for trips to Egypt, I connect travelers with local guides, and I even lead private group tours myself. In this video, I'm going to talk all about tour guides and hiring private tour guides in Egypt. First, we're going to talk about if you need a tour guide in order to travel to Egypt or not. Then I'm going to talk about the benefits of having a tour guide. And finally, for people who opt to not have a tour guide, I'm going to give you some advice. Let's get started. So the first question of, do you need a tour guide in order to travel to Egypt and throughout Egypt? The simple answer to that question is no. Travelers do not need a tour guide in order to go to Egypt. Travelers do not need to be on part of a guided tour. You don't need to work with a tour operator. You can do a trip to Egypt completely independently if you choose to. The only exception to this is that there are certain areas like the Black and White Desert or St. Catherine's Monastery and climbing up Mount Sinai where tours need to have an actual guide with them. In the case of the Black and White Desert, somebody who's licensed and knows that area. In the case of hiking up Mount Sinai, a Bedouin guide to go with you. But other than that, visiting the Giza Plateau and seeing the Pyramids and the Sphinx, taking a Nile cruise, going to any temple or tomb in Luxor. Travelers can do that completely independently. There is no need to have a tour guide with you at any point during your trip to Egypt. So now that I've clarified that travelers don't need a guide at all, the question is, what are the benefits of hiring a private tour guide when traveling to Egypt? Personally, I recommend to all of my clients who want to have a hassle-free trip, who don't have experience traveling in the Middle East, who don't speak some level of Arabic, to have a tour guide with them. And here's why. Having a tour guide in Egypt helps travelers avoid pitfalls. You might have noticed on other YouTube videos, blog posts about Egypt, or travel guides that Egypt can be a tricky destination to go to. There are a lot of people out there in Egypt who are wonderful, hospitable, kind people, but there's a small segment of Egypt's population that tries to take advantage of tourists through cons or scams. A lot of this is due, long topic that we'll have to talk about later, to the economic imbalance in Egypt and all of the struggles the country's been going to. But putting that aside, getting conned or getting scammed on a trip is no fun. It shouldn't happen to anybody, period. If you have a tour guide with you, they'll be able to notice these scams right away, put a stop to anything that's going on that is not supposed to happen. And when people who are trying to con or scam a tour group or an individual notice that they have an Egyptian tour guide with them, 90% of the time, they will leave that person or that group alone because they see that there's an Egyptian person with them. They know they're not going to be able to get away with whatever con they're cooking up, and they're going to leave you alone. It's really, really important, though, that you have a vetted and trusted tour guide on your trip, because just hiring any private guide in Egypt doesn't mean you're going to get somebody who has your best interests in mind and who's going to make sure that you have a hassle-free experience. All of the tour guides I work with have been vetted by me. They've done tours with me before, or I've used them with other clients in the past. I know they're going to give people a good experience. But hiring a random guide from the internet or somebody you meet on the street or at a cafe in Egypt might mean you're hiring somebody who's going to try to take advantage of your time or take advantage of your money, and nobody wants that for their trip. So I always recommend hiring a guide from a reputable company, or even better, if you have somebody you know, family member, friend, who's gone to Egypt and they have a tour guide they can recommend, that's an awesome way to get somebody you know you can trust. Another common pitfall in Egypt is that there's a very, very difficult language barrier between Arabic and English. A lot of folks who work in the travel and tourism industry speak English fairly well, but travelers to Egypt will often run into instances where somebody doesn't speak English at all. Having a tour guide with you who speaks fluent English and Egyptian Arabic can help you get out of some uncomfortable, awkward, or confusing situations. Another reason why having a guide is a great idea is because Cairo and Egypt as a whole is really difficult to navigate. Google Maps and GPS are a thing in Egypt, but oftentimes locations are incorrect, streets are winding, narrow, and hard to find, street signs are nowhere to be seen, and the best way to get somewhere sometimes is to ask directions from somebody on the street. However, if you have a travel tour guide with you, that person is going to know where you need to go, and in case something is not where it should be or you're trying to find a special restaurant or a specific shop, they'll be able to ask somebody on the street for directions and get you to where you need to go. And even on the inside of tourist sites like the Giza Plateau or the Valley of the Kings, it can be difficult to know where to go. How do I get over to the Sphinx? Where do I go to get to King Tut's tomb? When you have a tour guide with you, they get to cut out all of the guesswork and take you directly to where you need to go, making your trip a lot more efficient and easy. One more quick note on navigation. Some tourists opt to hire Uber and use that as their way to get around, and they don't go with a guide. But Uber in Egypt does not work the same way it works in the United States. I've had so many times where my Uber driver in Egypt has no idea how to use the GPS, doesn't know where tourist sites are, or hasn't even been to them at all. And so using Uber in Egypt is not a good way to do a trip if you're wanting somebody who knows exactly where to go. Now, on the other hand, if you're down to have a wild ride and want to get an Uber and have to try to figure out where you're going and where the GPS is taking you and dealing with road closures and construction, go for it, because it can be a pretty amazing exploration, but Uber in Egypt does not work the same way it does in the US. Two more quick reasons why using a guide in Egypt is really beneficial. Tour guides in Egypt have gone to a literal university and gotten a 4-year degree in being a tour guide. They know everything there is to know about all of the tourist sites in Egypt, whether it's an ancient tomb, an Egyptian temple, a mosque, or a medieval church. Any place you go where you have a ticket and you have a guide with you, that guide is going to be able to provide you with high quality explanations of what you're looking at, what the significance is, and they'll be able to answer any questions you have. It can be kind of challenging to go solo at a site using a guidebook or a YouTube video and trying to figure out, okay, where's this important thing that the guidebook says to not miss? Wait, was that the mural that I saw in the video that I have to get a photo of? If you have a tour guide, they're gonna be able to give you great explanations everywhere you go. My last reason for using a tour guide is that a tour guide can give travelers a safe connection to authentic Egypt. It's common for tour guides at times to share meals with their travelers and take them to their favorite local restaurants. Sometimes they've even offered them to go to their home and have a home-cooked meal. Tour guides are always happy to talk about Egyptian culture, heritage, religion, practices, norms. They love answering questions. They love sharing about their culture and sharing about who they are, who their families are, and they also love in turn to learn from their clients and to hear about what life is like in the United States or Canada. They're almost always down to talk sports, to talk politics. There really is hardly any topic that's off limits with a tour guide, and they give you a really great connection to authentic Egypt. And of course, you could also stumble upon somebody in a cafe or at a hotel who's not a tour guide who would love to chat as well. But having a tour guide gives you that built-in connection with a real Egyptian person. Now, I promised I'd give some advice for those travelers who still say, I don't want to work with a tour guide. Maybe they're on a really tight budget and getting a tour guide just is not going to fit into the budget. Or maybe they really want to DIY their trip and they're just super independent travelers. They don't want anybody helping them out or taking them anywhere. They're going to do it on their own. Here's my advice from being a solo traveler in Egypt in the past of what to do if you don't have a tour guide. First, you need to make sure that you get a really good guidebook. I personally recommend the latest edition of Lonely Planet's Egypt guidebook. This guidebook is going to be your Bible during your time in Egypt. It's going to tell you what hotels you should stay at. It's going to give you maps that you can use to try to navigate. It's going to give you all the information that you need to avoid scams at different tourist sites. A guidebook is the #1 thing you need when going without a guide in Egypt. The second thing travelers without a guide need to do is they need to do their research beforehand. You need to scour the internet, watch YouTube videos, check out articles, figure out what to do in Egypt, what to avoid, and then third, you need to have a really good itinerary. You need to get to Egypt with your plan and know where to go, what to see, in what order you want to do things, so that you don't waste time at the beginning of your trip figuring all that stuff out. And when you plan your itinerary, make sure that you're realistic. Look up actual itineraries of travelers who went to Egypt. A lot of times when I talk to people planning a trip, they want to cram way too much into one day, or they want to visit way too many cities in a span of days, and they don't realize how long it takes to get from place to place, or they don't take into account the crazy Cairo traffic. So make sure that your itinerary is realistic. 2 last pieces of advice for travelers going without a guide. They really should learn some Egyptian Arabic before the trip to Egypt. Being able to say simple things like greeting somebody with Assalamu alaikum or saying shukran, thank you, when at a shop asking bikam, how much, or learning some numbers, wahed, itneen, talata, arba'a, to be able to bargain more easily, that's going to really benefit a traveler going without a guide. And then my last piece of advice is travelers might consider using a guide for just some portions of their trip. Maybe somebody's really DIY or they have a tight budget, but maybe they can afford a guide for just the Giza Plateau. So they hire somebody who's trustworthy to take them around the pyramids and the Sphinx so they don't have to deal with any of the scammers or con artists there. Or maybe somebody hires a guide for the Egyptian Museum because they know that that museum has a lot of missing explanations and unmarked artifacts, and they want somebody who really knows their stuff. And then the rest of the trip doing it on their own. So that's it for today's video. We talked about if travelers need a guide or not to visit Egypt, the benefits of using a guide for an Egypt adventure, and some tips and tricks for travelers who are going to go it solo. I hope you found this video helpful. I would love it to have this video shared with all of your friends, family members, coworkers who are interested in traveling to Egypt. I love getting the word out about Egypt to more and more folks, and I'd love to help out more people with their trips. Shoot me an email anytime. I'm here to help. I'm Gus with Egypt Adventures Travel. Until next time.